Welcome to episode 19 of Pulse of Physiology. I'm your host, Dr. Jim Davis, and today we're starting our journey into the special senses with an exploration of sensory receptors. Sensory receptors are the foundation of how we perceive the world around us. Translating environmental stimuli into signals our nervous system can process. In our next episode, we'll focus on hearing, but let's delve into the fascinating world of sensory receptors. So to start off, you might be asking yourself, well, what are sensory receptors? Sensory receptors are specialized structures found in the peripheral nervous system that detect stimuli such as light, sound, temperature, pressure, and chemical changes. These receptors are responsible for gathering information about our environment and relaying it to the central nervous system for interpretation. So in order to understand sensory receptors, we need to define some key terms. There's transduction, which is the process of converting a stimulus into an electrical signal. Or in other words, we're taking a stimulus that's in one form of energy and converting it into another. Sensory receptors achieve this by changing the energy of a stimulus. For example, we can change light, pressure, chemical signals into an electrical signal and ultimately into an action potential. Then we have sensation, which is the detection of a stimulus by sensory receptors and the transmission of this information to the brain. Next, we have perception, which is the interpretation of the sensation, and this is done by the brain, giving meaning to these sensations. Finally, we have adaptation. The decrease in adaptation is the decrease in receptor sensitivity during a constant stimulus. Ultimately, this is important because it helps us focus on new and important stimuli. Now, sensory receptors can be classified based on their adaptation patterns. And so we've got two different types of receptors that we can classify this way. We have tonic receptors and phasic receptors. Now, tonic receptors are slowly adapting receptors that maintain a steady signal as long as the stimulus persists. For example, pain receptors and muscle spindles continuously inform the central nervous system about ongoing conditions. Then we have phasic receptors. Phasic receptors are rapidly adapting receptors that fire only when the stimulus begins or ends or changes. For instance, touch receptors, which are a type of mechanoreceptor, adapt quickly, allowing us to ignore the feeling of clothing on our skin or a ring on our finger after a few moments. Ultimately, sensory receptors are categorized by the type of stimulus they detect. So we've got photoreceptors, which detect light waves and enable vision. They're found in the retina of your eye. Next, we have chemoreceptors. These receptors detect chemical stimuli such as gases, pH levels, and specific molecules. Chemoreceptors are found in blood vessels and areas like the taste buds and olfactory epithelium. After that, we have mechanoreceptors, which detect physical changes such as pressure, vibration, and stretch. These are generally found in the skin, deep tissues, and some organs. We have a specialized type of mechanoreceptor called baroreceptor, and baroreceptors detect changes in pressure or stretch within blood vessel walls. Ultimately, they help regulate blood pressure by sensing the amount of stretch on a vessel wall. Next, we have proprioceptors, and proprioceptors detect changes in joint angles, muscle stretch, and tension. These receptors are crucial for body position awareness and coordinated movement. Next, we have thermoreceptors, and thermoreceptors detect changes in temperature. These types of receptors are found in the skin and hypothalamus, which allows us to sense both external and internal changes in temperature. Finally, we have nociceptors. These receptors detect painful stimuli from mechanical, thermal, or chemical sources. They're distributed all throughout the body to signal tissue damage or potential harm. Now, ultimately, most of these receptors work the same way. A stimulus will activate a receptor, and then this receptor will convert this signal into an electrical impulse through transduction. The strength of the stimulus is encoded by the frequency of action potentials, not their amplitude. Okay, in other words, more action potentials indicates a strong stimulus. We don't have one single large action potential for a strong stimulus. A stronger stimulus generates a high frequency of these action potentials, and ultimately this leads to increased neurotransmitter release and greater receptor activation. Now, not all stimuli result in conscious perception. Remember adaptation? Well, adaptation allows us to ignore constant, unchanging stimuli and enables us to focus on new or changing signals. For example, When you first put on a ring, phasic receptors are activated. Over time, they stop firing as you adapt to the constant presence of the ring. Tonic receptors, on the other hand, continue to send signals about the ring's presence until it is removed. Now, why are sensory receptors important? Not only are they important, but they are vital for survival because they enable us to do three things. First, they allow us to detect and respond to changes in our environment. They allow us to maintain homeostasis by monitoring internal conditions. And they enable us to experience the world through vision, hearing, touch, taste, and smell. So let's wrap up with 5 key takeaways. Sensory receptors are specialized structures that detect specific stimuli and relay information to the central nervous system. Transduction is the conversion of a stimulus into an electrical signal. Tonic receptors provide continuous information while phasic receptors adapt to constant stimuli. Different types of sensory receptors are tailored to detect light, chemicals, pressure, stretch, temperature, and pain. Finally, adaptation allows us to ignore constant stimuli and focus on new changes in our environment. And so that's it for episode 19 of Pulse of Physiology. I hope this episode has provided a solid foundation for understanding sensory receptors and their critical role in physiology. Join me next time for episode 20, where we'll explore the intricate process of hearing. Until then, keep questioning, keep exploring, and stay curious.